Well, welcome, friends. Are there announcements that need to be made today?
We have a monthly meeting for business this Wednesday evening, 7 Eastern time.
Uh,
I I am organizing the a Labor Day event, and we're gonna have it in three sites in Richmond, Indianapolis, and Bloomingdale. It's aimed for young adults and youth, but I mean, it's open to everybody. I If you have uh, youth or young adult adjacent to you, we're gonna there's gonna be games in preparation for Quaker Nexus that is in November. Um, the idea is that people gather points at this event by participating in. There's a sporty challenge, an artsy challenge, and some trivia, and plus points if you donate for the Cuba drive. So if you donate for our friends in Cuba um, through their Amazon list, you get points, and there's different points between the most wanted items and the normal ones. I mean, everything is wanted, but they're like most wanted. And yeah, if you have youth adjacent to you or young adults, please. It is You're gonna have fun, and also you can help friends in Cuba. And it's in the information. It's in the Western Yearly Meeting newsletter. Um, yeah, and yeah, I can send it to you as well if you want.
what about joys and concerns to share this morning?
Go ahead.
A very dear friend of ours and who has been a Decatur Township resident for many, many years, Mary Ann Hibbler, died yesterday. She was, I was very, very close to her and um, her son Greg is still in the township with his business, and they could use a lot of prayers.
We had the delightful experience yesterday of attending our grandson's wedding.
Oh,
Dale and his fiancee Elise got married yesterday in a beautiful wedding that was just exactly what you would expect for the two of them. It was a wonderful experience.
was it held at the farm?
No, but it was held in a barn.
That's Well, let us celebrate our joys together and lift our concerns to God in prayer, especially all those who've been affected by the storms and all the flood waters. I mean, every morning you turn on the national news and Indiana's in it. So we have a great many friends there, and I know down where Tate is gotten a lot of water too. So I don't know if Kentucky's had much, but I think I got a post that there was. So it's remember those folks. In the cornfields, they have 2 feet of water in them. We'll lift that all to God as we center into silence. And Jonathan Hubbard's our worship leader. He'll speak out of the silence as he feels led.
The title of my message today is The Power of Story. Several instances of synchronicity in the past few months have led me to consider the significant role that storytelling plays in human life. One instance occurred when I ran across the following story in Touchstone, which is the newsletter actually of a neo-pagan organization called the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, or OBOD for short. The story was shared by the current chosen chief of the order, an Irish woman, and it goes like this. Here is a story inspired by a few others. Truth and lie were twin brothers, and one day they stood by a river just outside of town. Lie challenged Truth to a race, claiming he could swim across the river faster than Truth. Lie laid out the rules to the challenge, stated that they both must remove all their clothes, and at the count of 3, dive into the freezing cold water, swim to the other side and back. Lie counted to 3, but when Truth jumped in, Lie did not. As Truth swam across the river, Lie put on Truth's clothes and walked back into town, dressed as Truth. He proudly paraded himself around town, pretending to be Truth. Truth made it back to shore, but his clothes were gone, and he was left with only Lie's clothes to wear. Refusing to dress himself as Lie, Truth walked back to town naked. People stared and glared as naked Truth walked through town. He tried to explain what happened and that he was in fact Truth, but because he was naked, bright and shining and uncomfortable to look at, people mocked and shunned him, and refusing to believe he was really Truth, they turned their backs on him. The people in town chose to believe Lie because he was dressed appropriately and easier to look at. From that day until this, people have come to believe a lie much more easily than believe a naked Truth. However, that is not the end of the story. Truth continued to walk among people unclothed and unadorned, as naked as his name. But whoever saw Truth turned away in shame or fear and gave him no welcome. So Truth wandered through the earth, rebuffed and unwanted and very lonely. He noticed that on many of his travels, Story followed a similar path. But unlike Truth, Story was welcomed wherever she went. Adorned in her brightly colored clothes, speaking her lyrical and poetic language and flashing her smiles of joy on all who passed her. People just loved Story. One day, Story came across Truth, naked and cold, huddling in the doorway of a ruined house. She bent down, worried, and asked why Truth had fallen so low. Truth explained that his nakedness frightened the people, that he was unwelcome and unwanted. Story took pity on him and gathered him up and took him home. There she dressed Truth in her beautifully colored clothes, warmed him and fed him until he was well again. Together they walked into town, Truth and Story. They knocked again at the doors and were readily welcomed into the villagers' houses. They were invited to eat at their tables and warm themselves by their fires. Truth, wrapped in Story, is beautiful and easy to behold and to hear. Since then, Truth travels with Story, and they now find love and acceptance wherever their journey takes them. Story allows Truth to shine, and long may it continue. Obviously, this story, a fable really, has any number of implications for the times in which we live. I'm sure we all have thoughts and opinions about the ways in which the naked truth is rejected and absent from our national dialogue these days, for example. While I certainly have my own strong opinions about that subject, I chose to share this story today by way of highlighting how story is so powerful in our lives because of the truth it can convey. When I use the word story in this case, I intend it in what might be referred to as the capital S sense, story. Story in its largest and truest manifestation. An example of this kind of story, similar to the fable, is that of myth. I once heard someone refer to a myth as the truest story that never happened. That was likely a paraphrase of something someone else said, but I like the ring of it because it conveys the fact that stories, such as myths, contain deeper truths within them, even though they depict events that didn't happen in reality as we understand it, meaning the reality we observe and experience with our five senses. Story, however, speaks to us from a different level of reality, a different kind of reality. Story conveys those truths that reside in what the psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, and theorist Carl Jung referred to as the collective unconscious. You can think of that as a shared level of the unconscious mind that's common to all people, the information within which we all may access and by which we are influenced. Jung theorized that within the collective unconscious lies archetypes. Archetypes would include concepts such as the mother, the father, death, the hero, the mentor. These archetypes exist beyond any individual example of them. We can speak of the hero in the archetypal sense at the same time that we can localize this archetype to an individual example of a hero, such as King Arthur or Wonder Woman. When we tell a story about an individual hero, we are likewise telling the larger story of the hero, capital T, capital H. This is because all individual stories occur within, unfold within the contours of all of the stories that came before them. This is also true, at least I believe that this is also true, of our individual human stories. Our lives consist of stories that intersect with the stories of others and also with the capital S stories previously mentioned, For example, the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 is known across the world. You could reference this story to people familiar with the Christian narrative in places from Austria to Australia, Japan to Jasper, Wyoming, and people would recognize that it was from the Bible and recounted the tale of a miracle worked by Jesus. The same is true of the Greek myths, the Roman myths, various Celtic myths, etc. These are big T, truth-containing stories that have been passed down across the centuries. The events that they tell cut across the various realms of history, culture, fiction, human experience, emotion, and the psyche. We experience these stories both collectively and individually. Recently, during our 30-minute discussion prior to meeting for worship, some of us responded to the following query: who is Jesus Christ to you? Both in terms of the historical Jesus and the present Christ. In responding to this query, we all told a little part of our own individual story and gave an account of how our story has intersected with the story of Jesus. Jesus, the historical person who walked the earth more than 2,000 years ago, and also the concept of Jesus as the Christ, present and teaching among us today. We can have a conversation about the information relayed within the New Testament, particularly the 4 gospel accounts, which depict a tiny fraction of the story of Jesus' life. Most of us would recognize at least some of the most well-known accounts of Jesus' ministry, the miracles he worked, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and the responses of the people around him to those events. Those stories are shared amongst us and beyond us. They belong to no one and to everyone. Yet the ways in which we experience and encounter those stories is very individual. No one can encounter the capital T truth contained within a capital S story on behalf of another person. No one can force us to experience capital T truth. Even if it was possible to do such a thing, I think it's fairly obvious that the doing of it would be a gross violation of individual autonomy. No, capital T truth must find its way to us as it will, and as we're willing to allow it. If the present and teaching Christ is the Logos, the eternal mind of God made known among us, as Quakers have always held as the case, then wherever we find capital T truth, it could be said that there we find Christ. Taking this a step further, some have argued that the story of Jesus is in fact the true myth. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were among those who advocated this view, namely that the miracle stories, the resurrection, the ascension, all of these events occurred not in a metaphorical or symbolic sense, but rather historically. They saw all of the previous myths as containing elements of truth that were ultimately pointing toward what would be fully revealed as the capital T truth in Jesus Christ. Not everyone would agree with this. Others argue that the ancient myths contain truths sufficient to themselves and should be taken on their own terms, and within the historical and cultural contexts within which they arose. However one may view these questions, I would encourage us to consider the ways in which the power of story has impacted our lives, whether contained in the Bible or elsewhere. Have you ever thought about your life as your particular story? Have you ever considered the ways in which the many stories of other human beings have intersected with your own? And the ways in which the great capital S stories have intersected with your story? May we come to experience and embrace the power of story in new ways, and in so doing, enter into a deeper experience of ourselves and the truth that we know as God.
Yesterday, I was talking with a friend who was having a very toxic relationship. Well, has ended a toxic relationship, but she's struggling to find the courage to stop that person approaching. Um, I was thinking about stories, individual stories, context, and every person is a different world. And how does that shape ourselves into our ethics, our way of being, our politics, our religion? Despite all of that, God still still finds, or like there is, despite all of that, there is something of God into every human being. Um, which sounds amazing. Like stories might be different for every people, contexts, cultures, and even the name of God might be different. and the way we perceive God. But still, there, like it's amazing how that transcends despite every situation. Uh, and to me, it is very that we don't have like God is so big and amazing that we can't comprehend its God's entirety. And I think that's intentional because God speaks to every condition and every story and every context.
It is the top of the hour, and we know some friends have other obligations, so we wish you God's blessing on the week if you have to leave. For those who can stay, we'll continue with some more unprogrammed worship. Thank you, Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Don and I went and saw the Odyssey this week, the movie. It was quite an adventure. But I noticed, I was reading about how after people have gone to the movie, the sales of the Odyssey, the epic poem, have ticked up considerably. And I thought about our own faith story, the Bible, which for many of us was our first, one of our earliest texts in Sunday schools or whatever. My Bible ABC book from when I was a kid is sitting up on my shelf here. But I think that one of the dangers is we lose, when we think of the Bible, or many people do, that it's a story of people long ago. And so we don't read it as much, thinking about the universal truths that are therein for our lives. And I think that's a danger, especially in some of the more conservative Christian groups, is that God stopped speaking somehow after the last book of the Bible, our Bible, was written. And of course, one of the things that Friends have always held is that God is still speaking and his will can be known and obeyed. So I guess, Jonathan, your message spoke to me that perhaps it's time for me to start revisiting that sacred text in a new way, and thinking about the deep truths that are coming through in each of those stories, from Cain and Abel, creation, resurrection, Paul on the road to Damascus, etc.
Last Sunday, I went to the island where my summer place is and attended the annual memorial service for everyone on the island who has died in the last year. And there was 6 people. We're not getting any younger. And, someone from the family generally would come up and speak about the person who was gone. And, maybe somebody would get up and say, oh, and I'd like to add this thing. And, we all had moments where it was someone that we knew or cared about, had known a long time, knew a long time ago, couldn't remember what they look like now, the variance of the depth of our relationships. And I thought about how it was that we all seemed to see the same person through very different lenses, depending on so many different things. And the last person who was memorialized was Bobby Howard. Long may his name be known. And he was somebody who would do anything for anybody. He had been a summer person, he became a year-rounder. and was truly, truly part of the fabric of that community. Um, and he was always smiling and always happy and always delighted to see you, even when you desperately wanted him to do something right now. And not a gossip. He was in and out of everybody's houses and knew everything and never said a word. And he had many, many, many wonderful qualities, but not being non-judgmental was high on that list. And but the thing that struck me was that this was the one where there wasn't a dry eye in the house. We all knew Bobby in a different way. We all came at Bobby from a different perspective. But we universally experienced something that was profound about him. His absolute generosity and love. He was just a love bug. And that is not, that is unmediated truth. There wasn't a story. Bobby didn't have, I'm sure Bobby had lots of stories, but the thing about Bobby was just that quality that beamed out of him, that can't be replicated. God knows I've tried. And that is an extraordinary truth. And the fact is I say I try, but I haven't tried hard enough, because it's accessible to all of us. We all have that of God. He had undirected, unshielded, unashamed, that of God, like the little light on the helmet all the time. And, may I have 10 minutes of that in my life?
if friends' hearts are clear, we can close meeting for worship.
That was a powerful message.
Yes, it was.
It was.
I'll be thinking about it for a while.
Thank you.
Well, it's
Good
good
to
to
see you,
see
everybody.
everyone. Hope to see you
See
next
you.
week. Have a good week.
You.
Bye, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.